been such a beautiful day with everyone. Just everybody had so many questions to ask me and to get my opinion on, and so I feel truly appreciated and cared for, so thank you, everybody. So one of the first things that I want to invite you to do is pull out your phone. I know you already have it in your hand. So, and I want you to look up this word, and the word is Ubuntu, spelled U-B-U-T-U, I think, wait a minute, B-U-N-T-U, that's it, U-B-U-N-T-U, Ubuntu. And the reason why I want you to look up this word is because it's important to this conversation today. So Ubuntu is a term, I can't get it on my phone, but I've talked about it enough, so I don't really need to. So it's a term that is frequently used by that beloved individual who won the Nobel Prize Award for Peace, Desmond Tutu. And Ubuntu means I am me because you are you. So the way that we show up in the world for each other is what defines our humanity. So I want you to keep that in mind as we talk, as I walk through this conversation and walk through this presentation. So no disclosures, and I'm not going to read through those, but I will show you will have the answers to them. So this is a land and labor acknowledgement, which you may or may not have seen in the past. And this one, and so I use this with my presentations. And this particular one means a lot to me because it was created by the American Medical Association. And for well over 100 years, the American Medical Association prohibited Black physicians from joining the AMA. And so why this land and labor acknowledgement means so much to me is because it included the lives and history of Black people. So we acknowledge that we are all living off the taken ancestral lands of indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We acknowledge the extraction of brilliance, energy, and life for labor forced upon people of African descent for more than 400 years. We celebrate the resilience and strength that all indigenous people and descendants of Africa have shown in this country and worldwide. We carry our ancestors in us, and we are continually called to be better as we lead this work. And so this, again, intersects with Ubuntu because this organization who has acknowledged that it was purposefully racist and prevented physicians in this country, Black physicians in this country, fulfilling and being able to practice with the fullness of themselves for over 100 years. And there's still a lot of work to do, but the AMA has certainly issued an apology. And the place of apology, sometimes we think that people just apologize because they feel like they need to do it to be able to move through something. But apologies mean something. And you probably had experiences in your personal lives where someone has hurt you or offended you, and when they genuinely and open-heartedly apologizes to you, it means something. And so I take this apology from the AMA in the way that it was written and given and accept their apology, but apology means that I apologize for the past, but I'm going to do better in the future. So this is just a few bullets about what the AMA has been doing, but let's go down to 2008. So only in 2008 was when they gave that apology. So because Black physicians could not join the AMA, we Black physicians formed an organization that still exists today that the majority of Black physicians in this country belong to, the National Medical Association. So in 2008, the leadership from the AMA went to the NMA meeting and gave a formal apology for its past over 100 years discrimination against Black physicians and Black patients. Because the harm, while the harm was certainly caused to Black physicians, the true lasting harm has been in relationship to the Black community in terms of service from healthcare providers. And one other thing that I wanted to highlight here, in 2004, they launched the Commission on Health to End Health Care Disparities, and we know that has not happened. They have certainly done work, but it has taken over 200 years for the health disparities to really be locked into the bodies and to the communities that are underserved. So it's going to take probably another 100 years for us to really come to understand that it's not just healthcare that's broken. It's the structural racism and bias runs through every system in this country. And so for people from diverse and marginalized communities to live their best and healthiest lives, we have to address all of the social determinants of health, not just medicine. So before I went to medical school, I went to nursing school. And in 2022, year before last, I guess, almost 2 years ago, the American Nurses Association apologized to Black nurses for the same behavior and the same racist behavior that the American Medical Association showed to physicians. And so, again, both of these apologies meant quite a bit to me. Personally, because I know I became a nurse so that I could become a better physician, and knowing that history of both the ANA and the AMA and how they are really trying to right the wrongs that they caused and the legacy of the wrongs, I believe that I continue to work with both organizations to try to lead that progress. And so now let's turn to the first topic, and this is implicit bias. And so implicit bias or subconscious bias refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. And one of the things, while I was sort of gathering my thoughts and putting these slides together, the Joint Commission, which a lot of us give the side eye to when they come to the hospital, has a lot of excellent information on their website, and it's just a whole host of diverse information. And this information about implicit bias was on that website. So another piece of information that I came across was that implicit bias develops early in life from repeated reinforcement of social stereotypes. Implicit pro-white bias occurs among children as young as 3 to 5 years old. And so when we talk about implicit bias, the words that certainly continue to come to mind is that it is something that we have no control over because it is information that we gain from our culture, we gain from our family of origin. And there are some people that didn't grow up in relationship to their family of origin for whatever reason. So whatever community they were reared by or had the most exposure to, those are the norms and mores and feelings about other cultures that they got from that particular group. So the implicit bias test. Okay, so first, who in here has taken the implicit bias test? Do you see hands raised on the phone by any chance? So, in full disclosure, I've taken the implicit bias test multiple times. And the first time I was excited to take it because I really wanted to understand what it was about. But what I was really dismayed about is that I still felt that the white culture was better than the Black culture. And so that was hurtful to me because I am the definition of Black power. And I stand in this space and say these words with comfort and ease and, move freely through any community in any way, just comfortable in my Blackness and however I show up in the world. But to have that test come back that I favored whiteness was problematic for me. But then as I learned more about implicit bias and, just that last sentence that I read, that we start learning about implicit bias at 3 to 5 years old, so that by the time we go to first grade, it's embedded in our culture, particularly here in the United States, that the umbrella that is over us is that white culture is always the best. And anything that is non-white is negative. And so it took me a while to really understand that and not be judgmental of myself, because I'm a product of this culture. And so what I'm hoping that happens today is that what we all take away, and I'm constantly learning as well, is that the concept of Ubuntu, I am who I am, and that helps you be who you are. So if you see me, see me completely. And because I've grown up in this culture where, whiteness is always at the top of mind, is always what we see first, I definitely have some negative feelings about that. So I'm doing this work just like everybody else is doing this work. And I try to show up better and differently every day, certainly for myself, but certainly for the people that I interact with. So the reason why I put this slide is because this test was developed by 3 individuals. This Harvard bias test, implicit bias test, was developed by a colleague of yours. I think he's probably retired now, but his name is Tony Greenwald from here at the University of Washington, and I looked up a lot of information about him. But this test it's fantastic, and I do encourage people to do it because it gives you an understanding of what this culture is like and how invasive it is, in our lives, even when we are proud of the cultures that we come from. And so I explain implicit biases, again, like being random access memory. So we live our day-to-day lives however we live them, but when we encounter something that we're questioning or we're not sure about, that involves part of our unconscious bias, it's that random access memory that just kicks in, at any moment, and those biases come out. And so this is the website for the Harvard implicit bias test. So how does implicit bias work? So these are examples of implicit bias. So white patients are overprescribed blood transfusion, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. Non-white patients receive fewer cardiovascular interventions and fewer renal transplants. And, and it is prominent in the literature, particularly about the lower rate at which patients, individuals who are Black and from diverse communities, receive transplants of any type, actually. So Black women are more likely to die from being diagnosed with breast cancer, while it's certainly multifactorial. And, there are some studies that show that people of color in general access the healthcare system for a lot of reasons, because the healthcare system is not easily accessible by people from communities of color, so that by the time many people from communities of color access healthcare, their cancer is more advanced. But even with that said, they still are more likely to die from it even after receiving what is standard treatment. So non-white patients are less likely to be prescribed pain medication, non-narcotic and narcotic, and patients with sickle cell disease frequently described being under prescribed pain meds. And hopefully, I'm hoping that you all have had the opportunity to hear patients with sickle cell disease tell their stories, because this is a very frequent story that they tell, that they have a condition whose primary manifestation is pain, yet when they enter the medical care system to get treatment for their primary symptom, they do not get adequate pain control. And I've heard this story time and time again. And what has made it worse, this opioid misuse disorder that is now ravaging this country, patients with sickle cell disease are finding it more difficult to get treatment for their pain. And morphine and opioids are the primary treatment for pain control for patients with sickle cell disease. So anyone that's in here that does apheresis or serves patients, the patient population with sickle cell disease, I am asking you to stand up and to support them in their lives so that they can live the best life that they can with this chronic condition whose primary manifestation of the disease is pain. and people of color are more likely to be blamed, to be too passive about their health, and stigmatized as non-compliant. So I do a lot of work. Monica mentioned the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, and so I do a lot of work with them. And then I'm also trained to do some integrative medicine techniques like auricular acupuncture, and I just got certified to perform Reiki. But this word non-compliant, for me, in my perspective, if a patient is non-compliant, that means that that healthcare provider has not developed a relationship with them so that they understand what the patient or client's definition of health is. Because as healthcare providers, our definition of what a person might need to be, in our eyes is healthy may not coincide at all with what we're prescribing or advising patients to do. So when they're not compliant, it's not the patient's fault, it's the healthcare provider's fault that they haven't connected with the patient on a level that they understand what the patient's needs are in terms of what their definition of health is for them. So this is the paper that I was just talking about, is racial differences in red blood cell transfusion in hospitalized patients. And so this second paper, this is the editorial comment that myself and several of my colleagues wrote in response to this paper. So this is the one, and it was statistically significantly different in terms of the transfusion protocol or using the transfusion protocol equitably for patients that were Black and white. So ultimately what this paper showed is that some patients that were white were over-transfused. They were transfused at a higher than indicated hemoglobin, and patients that were Black were transfused at a lower than the standard cutoff for hemoglobin. So remember, in the first definition of implicit bias, it could be favorable bias. Implicit bias can lead to favorable or unfavorable treatment. So that implicit bias that white folks need to get better treatment than Black folks led for overtransfusion of the white patients, and understanding that people from diverse communities deserve lesser care, then that's what happened. They were people from the Black community were under-transfused. But this particular, and I encourage you to read this editorial because it talks a lot about, we end this editorial explaining that it is our personal responsibility as healthcare providers, regardless of what our race or ethnicity is that we understand that we bring our full selves to whatever situation that we're in. And so as we bring our full selves, we're bringing our biases with us, and we need to understand that they're always going to be present, and try to learn what they are and check them and be cognizant of it. So implicit bias, what can we do? So the first thing that I encourage people to do is just be curious. Be curious about other ethnic groups, other racial groups, other people that make other kinds of choices and different kinds of choices, in their lives about, whether they want to be treated. They might have a condition, a fatal condition. There are people that make those choices that, I just want to live the life that I have and with whatever I have for as long as I can. And so not be judgmental of people who decide the life that I want to live may not be the life that you see for me, but it is the life that I choose for myself. So let's just be curious and thoughtful. Complete an implicit bias test, and then educate yourself and be culturally curious. Have a basic understanding of the cultures of your patient or client pool. Many of us live in parts of the country where we have small pockets of people that generally don't necessarily interface with the medical community for lots of different reasons. Their community may have been, had a history of being abused by the medical community, or they may have had a family member that died under suspicious circumstances, and no one in the hospital wanted to help investigate that. So people bring their full selves and their judgment to the medical community as well. So as well as us. So learn more about the communities that we serve, and understand and respect the magnitude and the impact of unconscious bias. And then this fourth bullet, which is really cool, so knowing the national standards of culturally and linguistically appropriate services in healthcare. And so you can go to the minority health institute from the NIH, and you can see what these standards are. But basically what these standards are encouraging is that people from the healthcare community who interface with diverse populations understand what the language is of that culture, and not just the language if it's foreign, but also learn how people from that culture communicate with each other. And how so that's the linguistic part, but then learning about the culture, knowing the kinds of foods that we find delicious or that culture finds delicious, that, do have a lot of salt and fat and all those kinds of things in it. Partner with, and so we can learn how to partner with people from diverse communities who and we do, I admit it, we do have a lot of foods that just, we need to figure out how to take a little bit and leave the rest behind. But learn about the foods that different cultures eat, because they're going to be eating that food when you go home. You might want them to eat a low fat, low salt diet, but trust me, when they get home, that is not what they're eating. And so work with a dietitian that can help these clients fix the foods that they love in a way that is palatable to them without some of the things that they add to it in the ways in which they cook it. And that is so incredibly helpful. And so this larger conversation in the healthcare community now is being had by different organizations. So this paper on the right is the American Academy of Pediatrics, who's looking at all of their policies and procedures to see if race is mentioned in that procedure. They're reviewing that procedure to try to understand why. If it has relevance and they can define and explain that it has relevance, then we can keep that procedure. But if there's no reason, no justifiable reason to use race in that policy or procedure, then they revise them and remove that language. And then I just found this article week before last, racial implicit bias and communication among physicians in a simulated environment. A couple of years ago, I went to a conference where they were using a simulated environment to look at some cases. And so this particular article was looking at that even when we use these hypothetical simulated cases, there can still be bias built into the programming. And that's because there's not a diverse audience of people who are creating these simulated examples. So again, bringing diversity into every aspect of our lives as healthcare providers is really important, as well as into our personal lives. Now let's turn to the conversation about medical education and the harm that the Flexner Report has caused to the medical community. So most of us first heard, everybody in here might not be physicians, but still probably most people have had some idea of what the Flexner Report is. But it was a report that was commissioned by the American Medical Association to standardize medical education in this country. But what it ended up doing, based on Abraham Flexner's recommendations, it actually ended up codifying racism in the medical education platform. So these were some of the recommendations of Abraham Flexner, to keep Black physicians separate and to prevent them from practicing medicine in a full way. So Flexner Report said in terms of Negro medical education, it should be separate, and that the practice of the Negro physician will be limited to his own race. So Black physicians could only treat Black people, and white physicians, of course, could treat anybody, Black or white, but Black physicians could only treat Black patients. In terms of different education, Negro doctors should become sanitarians. And so that term sanitarian meant that they only needed to be trained in techniques in terms of infection control. So they were never trained fully as physicians. They just needed to be trained in infection control, because when this report was done, many people that were Black were what are known as domestics. I don't know if you've seen the movie, what was that movie with The Help? The movie The Help is a perfect example of why black physicians were only needed to be sanitarians, because many black people lived in the homes during the week. They lived in the homes and lived with the white families that they worked with, took care of their children. In many cases, black women who were pregnant, they didn't breastfeed their own babies. They breastfed the babies of the white people that they took care of. So as long as the black people that were co-located with white people, as long as they were healthy not to transmit disease to them, that's why black physicians only needed to be trained as sanitarians. So Flexner recommended that to close 5 of the 7 historically black medical schools, and to only leave open 2 medical schools which are still open today: Meharry in Nashville, and Howard Medical, which was called Freedman's Hospital. So Howard University Hospital, that's the name of it now, but it was called the Freedman's Hospital because it was the black hospital that freed slaves could go to and get service. That's why it was called Freedman's Hospital. Just those 2 medical schools be left open, and that and he understood and knew that they were going to be unequal to the need of the number of physicians that were needed to treat the black community. And the medical care of the Negro race will never be left wholly to the Negro physician. And so that's why, again, white physicians would be able to treat black patients. And so this system was separate and unequal. We do have 2 more medical schools, medical schools that still educate a significant proportion of black physicians. And one is Morehouse Medical College. And then there's another one that was only in 2023 was it conferred that it graduated its first class of physicians that received their medical degree, and that's Charles Drew University of Science and Medicine in Los Angeles. It was in Watts, actually. And that medical school, when I was a medical student, I chose to do some of my rotations at Charles Drew because I had heard so many powerful and wonderful things about them, and I wanted to spend some of my time as a medical student in the presence of black excellence. And I went to the University of North Carolina, and while I had maybe 2 black physicians that were my attendings, being at Drew was pure heaven. And it just gave me such a lasting, warm place and warm feeling that I am still affiliated with Drew today, because that medical school gave me a sense of self and a sense of comfort about being a physician and understanding what my job is and what my journey is as a black physician in this country. So again, some of the aftermath of Flexner is that while specifically in regard to the African American medical education, the white medical schools were funded first, and that Flexner did not immediately recommend adequate funding for Howard and Meharry. And trust me, for 100 years, those schools have struggled and still continue to struggle somewhat in terms of having adequate funding for the school to continue to educate black physicians. And many of the schools now that are predominantly, that are affiliated with predominantly black campuses still educate a not insignificant proportion of individuals from other ethnic and racial groups as well. So African American schools struggled financially. And another problem was that the AMA also oversaw CME, continuing medical education and credits, and kept up pressure for those in relationship to the reform. And so the black physicians, when they did graduate from medical school, they couldn't find residency positions because, remember, segregation was the law of the land, and so black physicians could not get a residency program. So most of the physicians, until schools and medical schools were desegregated, came out of Meharry and Howard, and so Meharry and Howard actually had hospitals built on the campus or close to them where the physicians did their residencies. And so, again, this is just the little pie chart just to show exactly what happened. So at the time that Flexner recommended medical schools be closed, there were 131 white medical schools, 51 he recommended be closed because the white schools weren't, some of them weren't up to par as well. So, so I can't say that he targeted black schools, but because there were just so few, and it would have been a greater opportunity to help bring those medical schools up to standard, he just made the recommendation to just close those instead of work to help those few medical schools where black physicians could be educated to make them better. And then they closed, again, like I said, 5 of the 7 medical schools and leaving 2 open. So that was 71% versus 40%. And so as late as the 1970s, Howard and Meharry educated over 60% of African American medical students admitted per year in the US. And again, all this information is on the AMA website. So just a little bit about how structural racism, continued to wind its way and be an integral part of medicine in this country, is that black doctors had no or limited privileges at white hospitals until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed segregation and discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender, and national origin. So I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I grew up at a time where the hospitals in Winston-Salem were segregated. So when my sister did something crazy one day and she cut her arm, and so we had to go to the black hospital, which was called, that hospital was funded by the R.J. Reynolds Company, and it was named after one of the women in the family. Her name was Kate Bidding Reynolds, and that hospital was KDB. We called it that, but it was a dungeon. It was just a horrible place, and it smelled bad. And I was telling someone earlier today, as I just sort of recount that story, I can see what I saw and the smells that I encountered then. I was just a little kid, but it made a lasting impression upon me. And so hospitals also were segregated until 1965. Until when we implemented the Medicare Act. And so the provisions of Medicare were, if you wanted to receive the Medicare dollars, then your hospital had to be desegregated in terms of the patient population and the admitting privileges of black physicians. So if you were a hospital that was funded, locally and didn't need Medicare dollars, then you could continue to be a segregated hospital. But the only way to get those Medicare dollars is to desegregate, and that was really the impetus behind. And it was a specific codicil for the Medicare Act, is that it required, if hospitals wanted those funds, then the hospital needed to be desegregated. And so black doctors only treated black patients. I've talked about that already. So the AMA, and I already talked about this apology from the AMA, but and so all of this information also is on the AMA website. But what was really important about that is that since that time, the AMA and the National Medical Association have partnered together to help address health disparities and health inequities in the black community. So mitigating the legacy of the Flexner Report. So there is an organization called Beyond Flexner Alliance, or BFA, and that's the website, where it's a cross-cultural and cross-functional group of healthcare providers, teachers, educators, health policy makers that really want to try to reverse, even still today, the impact of the Flexner Report. And some of the things that they are looking at and are working on is centering health professional education in the community. Because, just educating the providers of healthcare is not going to get us where we need to be in terms of, dealing with health inequities and health disparities. We have to work with the community and find out what their needs are, find out what the definition of health is for that community. To have someone come into your community and tell you what your business is and how to take care of yourself, again, the whole community is going to be non-compliant. So we have to partner and work with the community and help define what healthcare, the definition of healthcare is for that community. Addressing racism in healthcare and health professional education. That's a major piece of this conversation that we're having today, is that it is all of our responsibility as healthcare providers to advocate for diversity in the pool of medical students. And then to go that step further, because getting into medical school doesn't mean you're going to get out and practice, because the attrition rate for students of color is also high. So part of our work should be those students that are from diverse communities, we need to work directly with them and ensure that they exit the medical school and that they have everything that they need to pass their boards and practice. So again, I just got this information. Again, it's very, very recent, looking at the demographics and statistics in terms of physicians in this country. So still, 65% of physicians in this country are white, and then the second largest population of physicians are Asian. So essentially, what? 20, not even 20, maybe, okay, it's a little quick math. Sometimes I get challenged. About 15, less than 20% of the population of physicians in this country are from the rest of the diverse communities. So we all have a lot of work to do, and it's our responsibility to work to identify students that are interested in medical school and support them. And so we need to start way back in middle school, and so by the time folks get to high school, some of them are struggling already. So you know how you have prepared yourself to be physicians and healthcare providers? You probably started in grade school. I knew I wanted to be a doctor when I was 6 years old. And so my family supported me and helped me reach this goal. And it was with love and care and, unearthing rocks and, moving things out of the way for me to get to be who I am and the position that I have today. But as people say, not only does it take just a village, it takes a whole community. So part of the responsibility that I am handing to you today is to help identify students from diverse communities to matriculate, graduate from medical school, and become physicians. And this poor slide right here. So this slide is a snapshot of blacks in medicine. So literally for 100 years, the percentage of black physicians in this country has been around 4 to 5%. And for over 100 years, I'm going to read it. I was just going to try to gestalt it, but I'm going to read it specifically. So in this 2021 UCLA study finds that the proportion of physicians who are black in the U.S. has increased by only 4% points over the past 120 years, and that the share of doctors who are black men remains unchanged since 1940. So if you don't see that as a problem, I'm going to invite you to get up out of that seat and leave this room right now, because this is a problem. And so we all have a responsibility to address this issue and understand why. Just seeing that as a statistic is one thing, but getting at the underpinning of why for over 100 years, black physicians in this country has been around 5%. I hope you see that as a problem, and I hope you see that as a challenge that you can take up. And so what are the benefits of a diverse workforce? Patient, physician, race, and ethnicity concordance is associated with a higher patient satisfaction and better healthcare processes. As healthcare systems optimize their providers' ability to establish rapport with minority patients, it can lead to improved clinical practice and healthcare delivery. And culturally competent providers have been shown to improve patient and provider satisfaction, and this is an important area of continued study and focus. And I talked to so many people today, but I know I had a conversation today with somebody about being culturally competent. And so this is another organization that I just love. It's the and so now we're moving on to the topic of interfacing with diverse communities. So this organization, Integrative Medicine for the Underserved, or I Am for Us, they created this statement on cultural misappropriation. So in the words of Fatima Ashgar, cultural appropriation occurs when members of a dominant group take elements or symbols of another culture for their own economic and social gain, while simultaneously devaluing and silencing the bodies, opinions, and voices of the oppressed culture. And so there is sort of this tension between the use of the word appropriation and misappropriation, and I use misappropriation because, as this statement says, sometimes when we think things are appropriate, we think that that's okay and that's good, and this act of defiance and disrespect of cultural misappropriation is not in any way, shape, form, or fashion seen as appropriate. So for the examples of cultural misappropriation include commodification, so using a cultural item or practice and turn it into a profit or a product or a profit or for profit, employing items or healing practices while not acknowledging the culture, history, or spiritual or life philosophy or meaning of the practice. And ones that commonly and frequently come to mind are certainly yoga, and it's probably people, and I'm sure, because I've done yoga, but I purposefully chose a yoga teacher that was well versed in the culture of yoga, and I perform a type of acupuncture technique called auricular acupuncture, but I learned about the history of acupuncture because I've always, when I'm ill, the first thing that I do is go to my acupuncturist before I go to the doctor, because I find that to be more comforting for me. And then some other traditional native healing practices such as sweat lodge. And this is probably about 3 or 4 years ago. There was this company in Arizona that was like a spa, and they were using a sweat lodge inappropriately, and 2 of the people that were in the sweat lodge died. And so we need to know, both the benefits as well as the drawbacks, as well as the cultural importance of these kinds of treatments. And so, is anybody in here a medical acupuncturist? Any physician in here is a medical acupuncturist? So one of the things that happened with acupuncture is that physicians, allopathic physicians, got into the business of acupuncture, and so now there's several programs across the country that specifically train physicians to do medical acupuncture, and it has some departures from traditional acupuncture. So again, it was misappropriated by physicians, and because it's some of those programs are really, really expensive. So even if someone who was not a physician and would want to go to this program or get licensed, it could be really, really expensive. And so the hierarchical structure of eliminating sort of the Asian population and other people that are interested in acupuncture from going to some of the acupuncture schools, has led to, again, complete, disconnection of the Asian thinking and history behind acupuncture. And then also, licensure is a money grab, basically. And so that's why, healthcare profession, nursing, physicians assistants, acupuncturists as well, are very territorial about, their worked product. It's because this is a way that these communities licensure and training in CME, while it certainly does encourage us to keep our our assets and our training and our skill set appropriate and current, still a lot of the work that's done through CME and licensure is territoriality and a money grab. So cultural misappropriation, what can I do? First, again, that same thing, just be curious. If you're interested in, learning Tai Chi or Qigong, sure, you can just go to a class and just learn the techniques, but the beauty of understanding and performing, I've been doing Qigong for about 25 years, and my teacher was was an Asian master of Qigong, and so I learned from him, and I love him. And so, that's the beauty of learning something from another culture, is taking the beauty of that culture along with whatever you are learning. So be curious, learn about the cultural and historical practices of whatever it is that you're engaging in, particularly food. You're talking about cultural appropriation of things. That's one thing that we do a lot of cultural appropriation is food, and not respecting how that food came to be such an integral part of a community. Familiarize yourself with whatever practice it is, and then the last one, and you ask the practitioners or teachers to review with you the culture and the history of the practice. So let's talk a little bit about mistrust in the medical community. So I still talk about the Tuskegee syphilis study. The actual name of the study was the study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. And I do have people that challenge me, why are you still talking about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment? It's because it's still relevant today. Because if we treated people that way, 70 years ago, and everything was in its place, we were addressing health disparities and health inequities in a forthright and a way, then yeah, we might not have a need to talk about that. But some of the things that existed back when this study was done still exist today. So no, we cannot stop talking about this Tuskegee syphilis study. And this study began in 1932 and only ended in 1972. I was a sophomore in high school when this study stopped. And so what the government did was offer the families and relatives of the individuals who were part of this study, offered them lifelong health care. So there are people still today who remember those relatives because it only ended in 1972. So there are people that knew some of the people that were in this study. So no, we are not going to stop talking about the Tuskegee experiment for a long time to come. So the past informs the future. So another question that I get is, well, so many good things are happening and we're moving forward in terms of addressing health disparities and health inequities now, why do we still talk about the past? Because the past informs the future, meaning that we have to have a knowledge of the past so that can help us prevent the repeating of whatever that was. So we have to rely on the past to inform us of what we need to be looking for in the future so that it doesn't continue to happen. So one of the things that certainly happened with COVID-19 is we were just, as the medical community, we were sort of starting to talk about health disparities and health inequities, but we were still, it was still under the covers. But what COVID-19 was completely blow the conversation up in terms of health disparities and health inequities in diverse communities in this country. Because remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, the communities that were most widely hit in a devastating way in terms of morbidity and mortality was the Black and Native American and diverse communities. And so that COVID-19, I feel grateful for COVID-19 because it opened up the space where we can have these conversations and talk about health disparities and health inequities and, what we can do about it. There's no question it had a devastating impact on the economy, on countries, on people's lives, but being able to see, the rainbow after a horrible storm, that's the way I see the pandemic. It gave me and lots of folks in this space an opportunity to talk about health disparities and health inequities and how we can address them. And remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, communities of color were reluctant to take the vaccine. And so then, the CDC and the US government just had all of these campaigns to get people to understand that, hand washing and wearing a mask is okay, but for you to prevent you from getting sick, COVID-19, you really need to be vaccinated. And then the other really important thing that happened in terms of health equity is remember that the vaccine trial was stopped because the pool of research participants was not diverse enough. So I loved that, and that really was an important thing for me to continue to talk about, because I talk about research as well and how do we support diverse communities to participate in research, and showing that trial could not go on until it had a diverse pool of participants was incredibly important. And so I think this is close to the last slide. It's close-ish to the last slide. So I want to talk about building trust in diverse communities. So this particular paper actually came from the nursing literature, and it's a strategic planning tool for increasing African American blood donation. But the principles that are that are shared in this paper are important for, anytime we want to enter into and partner with a community that has been traditionally marginalized or underserved or uninvited. And as you see, so there are 3 pillars in terms of blood donation, the stage of recruitment, donation, and then retention. But what you see at the top of every pillar is the first thing that you have to do is gain the trust of that community. And that's complicated because the community brings, and individuals themselves, but the community mindset collectively brings a lot of trauma and pain and hurt to the conversation, and maybe things you never even thought about addressing, and having people ask you questions about something that happened in that community, and you have to say, I mean, if you don't know that much about it, I have to find out something about it. You don't try to shout it down or ignore it. You be honorable and say, I really don't know. I don't have the experience about that, but I will get the information that you need so that we can have a cogent conversation about it, because that's how people learn to trust each other, is through truth-telling, not hiding. So in terms of building trust with marginalized, underrepresented, and stigmatized communities, first, be present, be visible in the community before asking for their resources. Many communities are marginalized, and intentionally, it's thought to not be intentional, but when you have substandard schools, when people, and this is happening across the country, communities that are traditionally ethnic communities, there's no safeguard for people who own homes in those communities, because people will come in with cash buyers and buy their homes and then, tear down the homes and buy and build this, $500,000 house in a community where most houses are probably $100,000 or $200,000, and then that increases the tax base, and so those people, cannot live in that community anymore. So, we have to be thoughtful about, how much access and how much we deserve as human beings. Again, I can only live the life that I can live if you allow me to share the abundance that we have on this planet. And so for a person who has the money to build a $500,000 house, there are plenty of other places that you could go and build your $500,000 house rather than coming to this community and decimating it. So people are not so thoughtful about, I don't need to live here. I can live any place that I want, but because the land is cheaper here and I can build this giant house, I'm going to take it and do it. So we need to be respectful of other people's lives and their communities. So build relationships with trusted individuals and business leaders and churches and politicians to identify the needs of the community that you can support. So one of the programs that we have in the American Red Cross is called the Sickle Cell Initiative. And we were supposed to actually start it. We started talking about it and putting together the processes in 2019, and then COVID-19 hit, and so we weren't actually, so we were supposed to start in January of 2020, but we really didn't get started until the third quarter of 2021, where we intentionally created processes and programming to invite the Black community and educate and work with the Black community to increase blood donations by the Black community. And so one of the first things that we did was we hired Black individuals to be recruiters within the community. And, within my own organization, we had some pushback on that. Don't you think that people who are other races or ethnicities can recruit Black individuals? And the answer to that question is yes. But the answer, the other yes to this question is, yes, that can happen, but everybody, and I'm speaking for everybody in this room, most people resonate and understand and communicate likely better with someone of their own race and ethnicity. And particularly in a community that has been particularly traumatized and marginalized by the white community, it's a tough sell to hire, 20 white people to do this kind of recruitment and feel that the community is really going that's going to resonate with the community. So what I advocated for and what we did, and we do have a diverse group of recruiters, but because we are trying to interface with a diverse community, it makes sense, it made sense then, and it will always make sense to hire and support economically the community, but also hire people that understand the language and the culture to do that work. And so, again, one of the bullets, the last bullet I think is really, really important, is economically support the community. So when you're doing catering or you're having some kind of event, go to the part of town that is usually under-resourced and work with some of the caterers there, or do hiring of the members of the diverse communities. Offer training within the community. One of the things that we have done is we had over 90% of the volunteers for the American Red Cross are white. While in general that's not a problem, but when you have a disaster that affects, a community of diverse individuals, you want to find some comfort in the people that are helping you. And so what we have started to do is help people prepare for a disaster, so we don't have to, to bring in a bunch of outsiders into the community to help people recover from disasters. So we are offering training to the community and educational opportunities and scholarships for people to be trained, in CPR as well as in swimming. The largest segment of people that die from swimming accidents are Black children. And so we have some really good, excellent swimming programs that we have instituted in the American Red Cross. And so this is a list of resources. And so in summary, be curious, explore your cultural biases, it's okay. The Flexner Report has had a lasting negative effect on the medical education, acknowledge it. Be curious about and learn about the societal contributions of diverse communities, and building trust with diverse communities can provide opportunities for collaboration and mutual benefit. So thank you so much. That's me doing my thing. I'm a regular blood donor as well. I'm not strong-armed by the Red Cross. I've been a blood donor since I was in college, and I love doing it and saving lives, and also working for the Red Cross. And this is the last slide with the Laboratory Medicine and Grand Rounds Attendance and Evaluation Form. So give me a thumbs up. And that's how you access your information. Or you can just, do the QR code and access your evaluation. So thank you. I've had so much joy sharing myself completely. In full disclosure, I'm always like this. And thank you so much for your attention this afternoon. And I thank everyone that's online as well.
Questions from the audience?
And so I ended right on time, right? Ish.
Thank you very much. So I guess a quick question, or a quick comment, and then a more serious question. The comment is just, I really salute you for harping on Tuskegee. The stain of that study is hurting all of us now with the resurgence of syphilis, and we have no idea how to treat it beyond these terrible courses of doxycycline, because we just haven't done studies to understand sort of good antibiotic therapy, and we can't make enough penicillin to keep up with it. So keep ringing the bell. I'll be right there with you. I guess. Sorry, I'll get off my syphilis high horse. The question is, with resurgence of sort of backlash to DEI initiatives, or even just sort of inclusive language in professional medical organizations. I learned recently about the Dermatology National Association had a whole brouhaha about this. Are you seeing this in other sort of national medical organizations, and sort of how do you recommend approaching that, and sort of trying to head it off the pass?
So the question is the backlash that we are now seeing in relationship to DEI. Have I seen it in other medical-related meetings or associations? And I've heard it quietly because DEI has such, now it's sort of looming large over so many things, and we talk about it. People don't feel comfortable, giving it shade out loud, but I've certainly heard it. And, my thinking and the way that I handle it is, I continue to talk about it, express the kinds of gains and the positive things about it. What's happening with DEI is that it's being politicized in a way that has nothing to do with it. It just became this, hot button issue because of what's going on in the political sphere, but we know that, and we have always known that people from diverse communities, and even when we had affirmative action, the people that received the greatest benefit from affirmative action were white women. So to think that doing away with affirmative action was going to harm Black and brown and diverse communities, it wasn't, So, and that's what people don't necessarily have, really thought about largely, is that, who did affirmative action really benefit? And so when that conversation starts, that sort of quiets people down. And I'm never going to back down now that we have this term DEI, and we're going to be adding some other letters to it, pretty soon. Is that I will never back down from it, and I don't feel a need to justify it. I just talk about the benefits of it, and if whoever I'm addressing can't see the benefits of it, I invite them to come along on a journey with me so I can show you how it's beneficial, particularly looking at the statistics regarding patient satisfaction. And remember, people now in hospitals, you get a smiley face if your patient, feels good about what happened, during their appointment and you met their needs, you get a happy face. So everybody's trying to figure out, when my patient leaves my office, how can I get a happy face? Well, some of the ways you can get a happy face from them is interacting with them in a culturally competent way.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for...
Thank you. So again, I really appreciate this opportunity to be here with you today. And when questions come up, Monica and Nicole and Hamilton all have my email address, and I gave it out to some of the other folks that I talked to too. So, I'm always in your corner. So thank you so much.